Well, good morning to you. We'll just check, double check. Yes, okay, it's Tuesday. It's Tuesday, December 29th. I'm Ryan Jesperson. Thrilled to be here with you on this edition of Real Talk. I want to give a shout out. These are, the live viewers. If you're tuning in on the podcast later in the day, we're so grateful that you continue to make us Canada's most downloaded daily news podcast, which is absolutely amazing. But we have this army, this audience that comes together every single morning at 8:30 Mountain Time. And what's really cool for us is from our perch, Sam Brooks and I, when we're getting ready to launch the show, it shows us that folks are waiting. They're like in the listeners' lounge, we'll call it. They're in the viewers' lounge. They're in the green room, so to speak, Sam. And we want to give a shout out to some of these. So, for example, James was very first on the comment line on the YouTube live comment stream this morning, wishing a good morning. Dixie quickly followed up. Dixie was number 2 in line. A shout out this morning to James and Dixie. Mark in Utah was up third. Brenda was there right after that. Here's Rose and Kaylin and Cam and a pizzeria, who's also Fatima and Greg. And whoa, Brett Halford is watching this morning. Brett Halford is tuning in from Spain this morning, which is absolutely excellent. You don't get people tuning in from Spain all the time. What a special occasion here. Tim Young is chiming in. This is great. We're doing this live. One of the best parts about doing this live, even if you're catching the podcast later in the day, or maybe you're going to be listening to these interviews. Heck, it could be January, February. Maybe it's in the middle of 2021. Maybe we're speaking to you in the future. Maybe in 2021, you're going to listen back to this podcast because you see who we've got on this morning and you want to hear these interviews. How cool is that this is a podcast? Really, it's a show that is live recorded. We're live streamed and then live recorded onto a podcast. So we have people checking out this show live right now on this Tuesday morning, all the way through to who knows when, which is never lost on us how very cool that is. The lineup this morning, excellent. We're going to be talking to Banff, Alberta Mayor Karen Sorensen coming up in just a little bit. Everybody knows where Banff is. Everybody in the world has heard about Banff. It's this mountain oasis. It's this paradise in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. And what makes Banff, a big part of it anyway, is the tourism. It's the gathering of people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people a year that touch down in Banff to experience the Canadian Rockies, to check out the beautiful scenery. So what does a pandemic do to a so-called tourism economy? At one point earlier this year, and her worship will talk to us about this, I'm sure. We'll be sure to ask her about it. Banff actually had the highest per capita cases of COVID anywhere in the province. So how has that community rebounded? What has this meant for the seasonal workers? Many of them, of course, that are visitors to Canada themselves. What does Banff's landscape look like as we start talking about, we're starting to transition into looking into 2021, right? We're starting to talk, I think, optimistically, cautiously optimistic, inoculation reality. What's this going to look like when we can start to get that confidence back? I mean, how excited are you? I envision specific things that I miss. I miss having to apologize to people in true Canadian fashion as I walk sideways. My buddy Slady, we call it the Slady slither. He'd slither his way through a crowded restaurant to make his way to the table. Sam, this guy's like 6'7". He's a big animal. He's a big man, and so he's got to slither his way through crowded restaurants. But I miss that. We always joke. We've said it before on the show. We miss actually, having to apologize to people when we actually sort of tip and spill beer on people as we're making our way to the seats at the hockey game. Or how weird is it? We've been conditioned since March of 2020. That's, I think, when it became real here, talking to a North American audience. If you were over in certain parts of Asia, certainly the pandemic was very much more real prior to March of 2020. But we've now been into this for about 9 months. So we're conditioned a certain way. Are you like me? Do you find it strange, the thought of reaching out and shaking somebody's hand right now? Or the thought of hugging somebody? Or the thought of gathering with your chums and singing whatever song arm in arm? Is that to look into a crowded movie theater right now? Imagine 180 people, shoulder to shoulder in a movie theater, just hammering down on fistfuls of popcorn and you hear somebody cough that, sorry, I'm just going to say it, that kind of that thick, robust, phlegmy, those types of coughs I'm talking about? Like the cough where you're like, that dude's been hacking darts for 30 years, that kind of a cough. And we'd hear that behind us at a movie theater, and so long as we assumed the person was covering their mouth, it didn't throw us for a loop. That was normal. That was just a normal sound of a big public gathering. Well, now these days, I mean, imagine 180 people shoulder to shoulder in a movie theater, and some guy digging into their purses for their N95 masks. People be bathing in hand sanitizer. We've all become kind of conditioned. These things, the idea of returning to normal. I can't wait to get to that return to normal. You know, I miss handshake. I miss the feeling, the connection of a handshake. Some people, it's been interesting to see some polling results. Some people have said they don't believe they're going to go back to the handshake. They don't believe, they're kind of happy to leave that one on the table. Do you have an opinion on that, Sam? Do you have an opinion? Or you were telling me that Banff's mayor is ready to go. Okay, let me ask you this though, real quick. Were you like a real handshake guy? I mean, have you always?
I love a good handshake, and frankly, I love a good hug.
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't know, we're social creatures. We need that physical contact. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, I appreciate a firm, stiff handshake. It feels like a good greeting, like I'm just sort of getting to know you that way. So it's like, I do know that a lot of people just hate handshakes.
Well, you
know
read
what I mean?
Yeah. Some people don't like them, but you read into, I think a little bit, you read into a handshake with someone. Like if somebody has a really firm, strong handshake, I think you attribute things like assertiveness to them early in, whereas if somebody has kind of that wet, flimsy,
the dead fish
handshake, you kind of go, like if you were walking into a boardroom and someone said, "Here's our CEO," and the CEO reached out and was like, "Bwah, bwah," you'd kind of, you might be like, "I'm not."
I have had a CEO give me a dead fish before,
you have
too.
Specifically a CEO
give you a dead... and of course I'm not going to name any names, but I do remember meeting a CEO at some point.
People are going to get onto their iTrade accounts right now so they can sell. They want to find out what company it is that has the CEO with the wet fish handshake. Anyway, the point is, all of this to say, and we now have Her Worship Mayor Karen Sorensen on standby.
She's enjoying the handshake conversation.
Well, she's probably wondering, she's probably thinking, if Jesperson didn't make the introduction to our conversation 11 minutes, we could have a longer conversation. So I'm going to do that. The point of talking about the hockey games and the movie theaters and the rock concerts and the supermarkets and the handshakes and the hugs is to talk about, to envision, to dream about. Yes, I am lustily dreaming. That's a weird hashtag. Lustily dreaming of a return to normal. And I wonder if Her Worship is too, because for Banff, a return to normal has big implications. Still in the show, still to come, dragon and legendary entrepreneur Arlene Dickinson will join us, and Guy Felicella. He's a TED talker. He's a remarkable guy. As he says at the introduction, the very beginning of one of his TED Talks, he says, "I have died and been brought back to life 6 times." And then he just lets that resonate, like I'm trying to do. He's died and been brought back to life 6 times. And now he's not in a bad way, in a good way. Lecture can be a good thing. He's lecturing us. He's teaching us, Canadians and people around the world, through the reach of his digital media efforts and his other efforts, about the opioid crisis. He's talking about drug use issues and addiction issues and supports, and most importantly, harm reduction. Guy Felicella saw what this show was doing a couple of weeks ago. He saw some of the people we were talking to. He saw what we were covering here on Real Talk. He reached out to us. These are the most meaningful connections. And he said, I've got some focus I'd like to have right now on Alberta, what's happening in Western Canada. I mean, BC and Alberta are getting, oh man, I'm going to say it because it is. We're getting killed. It is killing. I mean, it's unbelievable. And Guy, I know, will paint a picture. He says, the opioid crisis across Canada, he said it's like the number of people that are dying. It's like a Boeing 737s going down every 2 weeks. And the numbers are actually probably tragically up since then. So we need to cover that. Listen, we got to get the conversation started here because we've got a great show in store. I want to remind you that our conversations, this show, each and every day that we're on the air, is presented by our title sponsor, Bitcoin Well. It's going to be a big 2021 for Bitcoin Well. And hey, you can't hold me to this. Don't ever take investment advice from me. This is just me and my powers of observation. It looks to me trend-wise, I'm just saying, based on what I'm seeing, that it looks like 2021 might be a big year for Bitcoin too. I'm just saying, if that's a game you want to get in on, or maybe you already know, a lot about Bitcoin, but you want to chat it out with the experts, the Canadian company based out of Edmonton is Bitcoin Well. They're going public this year too. It's going to be a big year for them. They're moving locations. They've just hired, they've quadrupled their workforce. It's a crazy story. Adam O'Brien, the CEO of Bitcoin Well, he'll be coming up again in the next month or so on the show, and we'll look forward to that. Sam, let's rock and roll.
Real Talk starts now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
I love this from Brenda. Brenda's chiming in on our live chat on YouTube. By the way, this morning, I don't know if you saw, we crossed the bridge, 4,000 plus YouTube subscribers, which is awesome. Woo-hoo! Yeah, I know. That's pretty exciting stuff. So of all, we have people joining us, people streaming live right now on Mixlr, and then the kind of the lion's share is our podcast subscribers. But this YouTube audience continues to grow, which is exciting for Sam and I, and we appreciate everybody that subscribes, that rings that bell, and that tunes in live every morning to hear interviews like this. Let's get right to it. She is the mayor of probably, I'm going to say, maybe the coolest place in the world to be mayor, Banff, Alberta. Karen Sorensen, your worship, is that a fair assessment? I don't know where I'd probably rather be mayor than Banff, Alberta, to be honest with you.
It is an excellent place to live, and it is an excellent place to be the mayor. It really is a huge privilege. Of course, we're a small community. We normally have about a population of about 9,000, but we have over 4 million visitors come every year, and it is an extraordinary and truly unique municipality within Canada.
Yeah, and I would imagine, to state the obvious, that means different things for entrepreneurs. It means different things for business owners, employers, and then for elected officials. That, I mean, you've got to develop and carry out policy based on not just what works for your residents, but what works for visitors as well. And the powers of prognostication you've got to have, I would imagine, would be significant. 4 million visitors a year on average. What about 2020? Are we talking 10% of that?
It wasn't as bad. To your point, you're correct. We work with both levels of government, three levels of government. Municipal, I obviously work with the provincial government, but we work with the federal government all the time. We sit in Banff National Park, which again, only Jasper and Banff are the municipalities that sit in a national park. And so Minister of Environment and Climate Change is really our go-to department federally. So when it comes to businesses wanting to open, or how we build our infrastructure, or even what kind of sign you want to put out in front of your business, it is all very strictly regulated, and everything is viewed from the angle of an environmental lens. So it is really interesting, and I enjoy every minute of it. As far as 2020 goes, when we all realized what was happening in March, it was devastating. Of course, conversations were happening very quickly. Projections were being made. We were watching everything fall apart. Again, as a municipality in a national park, we serve one purpose, and that is a site for visitors, to welcome visitors. That is our role. That is why we were allowed to have a municipality in a national park, is a service center for visitors. And of course, a home for the people who live here who serve those visitors. So when tourism takes that kind of hit, it is our, frankly, entire economy. Yeah. And I certainly understand that lots of economies have been devastated by this. Tourism is definitely one of them, and that is our only economy.
Is it? But there's got to be, I would imagine, something different in the sense that you've got to ride out the storm, which for a lot of folks, I mean, we won't ignore the fact that, we've talked to some experts, that have suggested that 25 to 30% of Canada's restaurants could close. I don't know what the local numbers might look like, if you might have insight there, but it's different than, I'm trying to think of an example of something. If people didn't feel safe somewhere, for example, there had been I don't know, heaven forbid, I don't know why this is coming to my mind. Maybe I'm thinking of, some of the stories in 2020 in the United States, but like a series of mass shootings or something where people go, I don't know if I can't forecast what's going to happen. I'm not sure I feel safe. Something like this, where I think it's very evident that people are eager to get back to normal, where it's something like you got to get through a pandemic and then, I mean, are you just bracing for an influx, or do you think that there's going to have to be a confidence building exercise to draw people back to Banff? I'd be more inclined to think the former than the latter.
So that's a big question, and there's lots of answers going in different directions. First and foremost, safety was our number one priority, and all of Town Council was in agreement on that. Some, feedback often is, well, if we have to close, or if we put check stops up and ask why people are coming to town, as we were doing in the spring, that impacts the economy even more. But our number one priority, and continues to be, is community safety for our residents and for our visitors. And what happened because of that, and a number of things that we put in place, we became known as a safe destination during the pandemic. And while we were projecting a summer of 10-20% occupancy in the community, we actually saw the municipality measures vehicular traffic. So we actually saw 70 to 75% of vehicular traffic in summer 2020 that we would have seen compared to 2019, as an example. I want to make it clear that does not mean that our hotels were operating at 70 or 75%, our retailers were not experiencing 70, 75% of their revenues, but people were coming. And by people, I really mean Canadians, particularly Albertans and people from British Columbia, but a lot of people got in their cars and did the Great Canadian Drive and ended up in Banff. And that was a good thing. With this the other thing, Banff was able to maintain a very low case count. Sort of over the summer, I think the max number of cases was around 20. But with this second wave, we got hit, and we got hit hard. At one point, we had 191 cases was our top number. I should mention, too, that's Banff, Lake Louise in our region, but predominantly the town of Banff.
That was the highest per capita number, though, in Alberta. That must have been for you with somewhat limited hospital resources as well. That must have been a bit of a rattling circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something we're proud of. I guess we're not surprised. We were, I would say, very blessed through the summer and through the early stages of the pandemic. And not shockingly, we ended up with a spike. And it is very concerning. The reason we were the highest per capita, again, going back to our population. So in our region, I think they consider us at about 13,000 people. So when you have 191 cases per 13,000 people, then that makes your per capita number very, very high. I think I sort of missed the point of your last question in terms of what's going to happen now.
No, I don't think you missed the point, but I'm just curious. Like, I don't think. I mean, I know that there's a lot of investment in advertising in tourism. That's really important. And a lot of the ad campaigns are halfway around the world drawing in international visitors. But I'm just curious to know if you think that you'll have to reinstill trust and confidence in visitors to come to Banff. I suspect that's not the case. My guess is that people I guess what I'm doing is speaking from my own perspective, Mayor, where I just can't wait to get back. But of course, we're waiting on things like a vaccine that might give us confidence. How do you approach that as mayor?
Yeah, so I think the other interesting part of this is the province is suggesting that perhaps you shouldn't be traveling too far or unnecessarily, but in the same breath, people are looking for places where they can feel safe. And a national park with your family, being able to be out on a hike and appropriately social distance is a real draw, as is snowshoeing and cross-country skiing and getting out on your fat bike. And of course, the other thing is our ski areas have stayed open. And there's some balance there as to whether that's the right call or the bad call or not the right call. But at this point, the ski hills are open and they're busy. So I think people are really drawn to what we offer here in Banff and in Banff National Park. Although, on the other hand, Banff Lake Louise Tourism has really stopped all promotion at this point into the first quarter of 2021. We are anxious and looking forward to welcoming the world back. More than 50% of our visitation usually comes from outside of Canada. So the vaccine and feeling safe to travel will play a big part in this. But as far as being a destination where people want to come, are drawn to come to because of the wide open spaces, and I agree with you, feel safe is probable.
Mayor, you've announced that you will not be seeking re-election in the 2021 the Alberta municipal elections, which means, I suppose, it's a wide open race in Banff. It's always interesting. I think, in particular, I think politicians, some of them the most interesting ones to watch are the ones with like a year left in their mandate, a year or less, because really, you've got nothing to lose. And right now, politicians don't typically use the word legacy. But right now, I would imagine that there are probably some legacy projects, let's call them priorities, in front of you between now and October. What are they?
Well, thank you for asking. I will have served in October of 2021. I'll have served 17 years. I sat for 2 terms as a councillor, and I'm now in my 3rd term as mayor. And of course, in Alberta, we had a year change. We were 3-year terms, and then for the last 2 terms, we've been 4-year terms. So I have decided, and in fact, it didn't just decide. When I ran in fall of 2017, I said at that time my 3rd term as mayor would be my final term. But I'll tell you, this will not be easy to walk away from. I'm so proud of so many things that we have done. And you make a great point, Ryan. It's knowing what's happening in the next year or two, and I want to drive it forward. And frankly, things take time, and I can't, and I probably won't be able to achieve the future things that I would like to see get done. However, I feel very comfortable and confident in what my goals were this term. And there is probably nothing I am more proud of as having sat for this many years than Rome Transit, which is our transit system. We're a very small community. We operated in Banff, and then we started a service between Banff and Canmore, and now Canmore has Rome Transit, and now we're out into the park, and we're really making great headway in getting people out of personal vehicles and experiencing Banff and the Bow Valley and the National Park with an alternate form of transportation. So proud of Rome Transit. Our other big issue forever in Banff has been housing and cost of living. And really delighted to see, we for 3 years had a 0% vacancy for rentals. And although now it's all wacky, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But we did see our vacancy rate come up, and most proudly built an undermarket rental facility, 132 units, TNU, with the help of the federal and the provincial government. And so delighted to get that in place, and just getting going on a under market value housing for purchase. So people will in fact be able to purchase a condo style living accommodation, in trying to get more people to be able to actually purchase a home in Banff, which is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I thought actually you weren't allowed to do that. How does that work? If I want to buy a condo in Banff, what do I have to do? Do I have to live there?
Oh, thanks for the clarity. No, for our residents.
Yeah. So how does that work? How does that work though?
Yeah.
Like if I retire and move to Banff, can I buy a house there?
You can buy a house, you can't live in it. So it's actually a federal regulation for a municipality and national park. I always forget the formal term for it. We call it need to reside. And so it is a rule in the national park that in order to be able to live here, you need to be working in the national park. And then if you have worked here for a period of time, I believe it's 5 years, then you can retire here. But that is why we continue to be so unique compared to Whistler or even a community like Canmore. You know, we don't have timeshare, we don't allow Airbnbs, and that is not what our housing is for. Our housing is for people who are required to live here in order to serve the national park. I'm
going to phrase this weird, but I'm going to say, are you able to get away with, because if Mayor Iveson or Mayor Nenshi or Mayor Stewart in Vancouver or Mayor Tory in Toronto tried to say no Airbnbs, they would have pitchforks and torches at City Hall. Are you able to get away with that politically just because there's like literally zero vacancy? Like,
absolutely.
What are you going to do?
Because that is, well, it's because that's not what our houses are for. Again, it sort of comes back to that need to reside and not doing nightly rentals in a residential area. We have the authority, really through the federal government, to say no, and we come down on them. I mean, we have a team that watches Airbnb and VRBO and et cetera, and they get fined if we find that people are trying to rent their personal homes out.
Have you doled out any fines? Has that actually ever happened?
Oh, I believe so. I mean, it's not what I would do.
No, not you.
But
Mayor Sorensen out with the tickets, the ticket pad.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this.
You know what? We've done a really good job. I think there was 1 year specifically that we aggressively went out and enforced, and I believe that since then things have improved dramatically.
Mayor, I know that, or I don't know, I assume that this was a COVID-related precaution, shutting down Banff Avenue to vehicular traffic, opening it up to pedestrians, giving people a little more room to roam. But there are multiple audience members this morning saying that they would love to see. Sylvan Lake kind of did this a little bit with Lakeshore Drive there. But what about making that more permanent? Is that something that, I mean, again, you know, this would be maybe something, a vision for a future council, but is this something being discussed in council chambers?
Yeah, absolutely. Pedestrianizing the downtown core of Banff has always been discussed. One of the biggest challenges we have is because we're on a set footprint and we have limited road space and we have a lot of vehicles, it doesn't always work. And Banff Avenue being our main thoroughfare, it can be very challenging. It was, I believe, a great success last summer. You're right, we did it for safety purposes so people could social distance and allow then, in fact, our businesses to operate a little bit more extensively because we don't allow businesses out on our public spaces, but last year we did. So we're already in the throes of looking at a plan for 2021 because we do not believe that we will be through this in summer 2021, at least in the term you use of normalcy.
Yeah.
We believe people are still going to want a mask. They're still going to want a social distance. So we are creating a plan. In terms of this being a permanent opportunity, I think we will continue to look at it. As I said, from my perspective, my personal perspective, if we can get people to park somewhere else and get out of their vehicles, then it's a perfect downtown core for pedestrianization. But having people drive around in circles looking for a parking spot with their personal vehicle really hinders that. And I should add too, one of the reasons it was successful last summer, for those listening and watching, there was no motor coaches. There was no tour buses here. And I'll tell you, we got a lot of tour buses. And when you're filing those tour buses onto the residential streets, that run perpendicular or parallel, then it causes angst.
Yeah. Oh, is that right? Is people that live there don't love having tour buses roll past their driveway every 30? That's interesting. Mayor, I want to go off on a tangent here talking about I wander around Banff and I grew up in Banff. I mean, not actually literally, but I grew up in Calgary.
Well, then you can live here.
Well, yeah, I'm always trying to find loopholes on how I can buy property in Banff. I mean, and then there's also the fact that everything would be like $2 million. But I just, my point is, like, we would be in Banff all the time, and I feel very at home in Banff, and I love the history there and the history of like the Brewster's Company and this, that, and the other, but we don't have time to get into it. But obviously tourism has been hugely important for well over a century there. Let me ask you about two priorities that I know you've had just in doing some reading and preparing for this interview. Obviously, there are environmental issues to be considered in Banff all the time, and we're going to be talking to some experts over the next couple of days. Now, I'll acknowledge this is not in your backyard, but some of the coal mining, the strip mining that's happening in Alberta right now in the Rocky Mountains, I think people are looking for facts on what that actually means, what the actual implications are. But people are talking about finding the balance of an energy economy and environmentalism. And then I think also Albertans are turning on to, and I hope that this is true and accurate, the age of reconciliation. What does that actually mean? I mean, we talked to Adam North Pagan from the 60s Scoop Society, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago on the show, and marked the 5-year anniversary of the release of those recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we tried to evaluate it fairly and say, what have we actually accomplished? And I don't want to say absolutely nothing, but closer to nothing than everything. On the environment and Indigenous relations front, what will your final year in office as the mayor of Banff look like?
So thank you for that. I just wanted to touch on the fact that as an Albertan, you feel that you grew up in Banff, and we know that. We completely understand that Albertans feel that Banff is their town. Really, a lot of Canadians feel that Banff is their town, and we feel the same. We love our Albertan neighbors, and you should feel that this is your community as well. So thank you for that comment. With COVID, Town Council in Banff always creates a 4-year strategic plan, which leads into the next council. So our strategic plan will go into 2022 at this point. And of course, with COVID, some big breaks got put on a lot of our strategic thinking and our planning. On the Indigenous front, really our goal this term was to increase our dialogue with our Indigenous neighbors. Stoney Nation is just to our east with Canmore and the extension of Bow Valley between us. I personally was having lots of conversations, not only with Stoney, but also with Siksika and a few other nations who often will come to Banff for their conferences, etc., and really trying at a political level to understand how we can move forward on some of the reconciliation outcomes which is a goal of the town of Banff. And we actually have administration working on a plan for the town of Banff to be much more proactive. Sadly, to your point, COVID has put a stop on a lot of things that included. And I think the best I can do in these next few months is make sure that I maintain those relationships, that we come together. Of course, our Indigenous neighbors really communicate best in an opportunity to storytell and to meet face to face. And we have to try and figure out a way to continue to do that. I did have a meeting not so long ago. We were I think there was about 13 of us. We were in a great big ballroom at one of the local hotels. We were all masked, and we were able to have a conversation. I also have to say, just because of your listeners, big shout out to U of A on their Indigenous course. I don't know if you've anybody talk about that course.
Yeah.
I'm on module 11. Honestly, Albertans, it is such an education. And I grew up in an era, where I thought some of our founding fathers were heroes. And I think that's the best thing any Albertan can do right now is take that course.
It's funny, Mayor, I'm still shaking off the shackles of a traditional broadcasting career where right now, I'm going to be honest, I have the tiniest little bit of anxiety because it's 9:00 just ticking to 9:01. And I'm going, I have commercial spots to read and I have a news update. And then I also go, we can do whatever the hell we want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the news happens at 9:07 or 9:08. Now, I'll acknowledge you probably have a busy day, and we got to let you go. And Arlene Dickinson's going to be joining us soon. Arlene's ready to go. Okay, so I'll make this the last question, and it's going to be somewhat not ambiguous, but open-ended because you've just touched on it. We've had conversations around, taking down statues of Sir John A. Macdonald or renaming schools all of these. I don't have to spend minutes teeing it up. Everybody knows what we're talking about. Now, in Banff, there are some whether it's renaming mountain peaks, whether it's how we tell our stories and history. How is, and we'll use this opportunity to wrap here. We'll leave on this note. What are you seeing happen in Banff? And hey, let's be honest. Let's have an uncomfortable moment here. What needs to happen that's not happening right now? What makes you uncomfortable as mayor in your own community?
Just quickly, and it is mostly naming. I will say in Banff and Banff National Park, and I'm trying to move quickly here, it's mostly geographical.
You don't have to move quickly. Just take your time to answer.
Okay.
It's all good. It's all good.
And often it falls outside the town of Banff. It's actually a Parks Canada decision and conversation. So people who are advocating for, say, one of the most popular ones here is Tunnel Mountain. There was supposed to be a tunnel built through Tunnel Mountain. There was never a tunnel in Tunnel Mountain, and the original name was Sleeping Buffalo. And so lots of people are engaged in, for instance, that name change. Not that Tunnel Mountain is necessarily offensive, but going back to what the original name was intended to be. And again, not only does that fall in the Parks Canada realm, actually, what I've learned in a conversation with the superintendent is there's a naming committee in Ottawa for Canada's geographical places, and it has to go through quite a process. There was another mountain in Banff National Park with a very offensive name, and my understanding is that it's been changed. It just isn't at this point on a lot of the mapping and stuff that you can buy. They obviously have or get a map of Banff National Park. It hasn't always been changed, but I would say within our community, but certainly within the national park, it's predominantly geographical, and that is and to your point, exactly, mountain names, and that is really all I've seen here specifically.
Mayor Karen Sorensen, we're grateful that you've made time to speak with us this morning from paradise, from the mayor's office in beautiful Banff, Alberta, Canada. Wishing you all the best, a very happy new year, and of course we'll look forward to see where you apply your experience and your skills and abilities post-political career. Thanks for making time for us.
Thanks, Ryan. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Happy to come back anytime. My best to Arlene. Sometimes we tweet back and forth, and I'm going to listen in. Okay, well, let me ask you this. I always love doing this when there's guest crossover. Do you have a question you'd like me to ask Arlene? We'll make it the first question. Too much off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I can't come up with one. But okay. I'll tell you, just say the mayor of Banff sends her best. Oh, I sure will. I have about 300 questions for her, so we're all good. Thanks, Mayor. That's okay, good. That's her worship, Mayor Karen Sorensen of Banff, Alberta. As mentioned, Arlene Dickinson coming up in like 1 minute. We're going to do this quickly. Just wanted to remind you how grateful we are to have the support. Hey, if you're hitting the highway, if you're going to be en route to a destination, all things considered, of course, we know that plans have been scaled down for everybody.
everybody, but it doesn't mean that safety isn't your top concern on the highway. The brand that everybody trusts when it comes to safe highway travel these days, when it comes to capability on the highway, on roads, heck, on your way to the supermarket and back, considering some of the storms that we see, is Jeep. And the Jeep dealer that people trust here in Alberta, where we're broadcasting from, it's a pair owned by Scott Heldon and his team, St. Albert Dodge and Sherwood Dodge, with Alberta's best Jeep selection. The sales and service fronts both recognized in the Metro, Edmonton, and Capital Region as Alberta's best. So if you're thinking Jeep for 2021, if it's time to trade in that old ride, if you just don't have the confidence your car is going to start for you every morning, look to St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. We're also grateful for the partnership of Alta Moving and Storage. For some of you, whether it's a New Year's resolution or maybe just a reality check post-pandemic, you know you got to be changing up your routine, and that might involve a move. If so, the way that everybody's doing it now, the convenient way to do it is with these pod-style containers. You give them a call at Alta Moving and Storage. You find their details under the contact link, the sponsors link, that is, at ryanjesperson.com. They'll drop off that pod-style container. You want to load it up yourself? Cool. You got your own boxes? Fine. You want the eco-friendly frog boxes? They've got them. You want movers? They've got them too. Plus, short and long-term storage, all locally owned. Check out Alta Moving and Storage. I'll tell you what, we've been looking forward to this conversation with Arlene Dickinson forever, and so with apologies to those that may be tuning in to get news headlines, we'll do those at the bottom of the clock. We'll do it at 9:30 because I don't want to leave her sitting here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I'm just troubleshooting her video right now.
Troubleshooting videos.
Yep.
Okay, well, I'll
so
tell you what.
Why don't we run some
why
headlines?
don't we? Is it cool for you to? We'll run the headlines right now, Sam. And are you able to show me that COVID-19 board? This is good. Sam Brooks just killing it behind the scenes, everybody. Doing a great job. Arlene Dickinson coming up in just one moment. Dr. Deena Hinshaw with an update yesterday. We saw COVID-19 deaths in Alberta, over 1,000 for the first time we've seen it following the Christmas break. And so there you have it. Those are the numbers that are tough pills to swallow, certainly, as Alberta continues to weather this storm. The reality across Canada, the number one priority now is to get people vaccinated. We know that about 4,000 additional vaccines on their way to Alberta. We're still at the stage where it's healthcare and frontline workers and our most vulnerable citizens that are receiving those inoculations first. And, of course, we're going to keep you posted as that story changes. A new poll out this morning from Leger and the Association for Canadian Studies found that 30% of respondents in Alberta, there were about 3,800 respondents across the country. 30% of Albertans satisfied with the job that Premier Jason Kenney is doing when it comes to COVID-19. That's the lowest level of satisfaction for Canada's 10 provincial leaders. Manitoba's Premier Brian Pallister, who's also been really struggling in the polls. Manitoba has certainly seen that wave of new infections. That was a story that we were covering a few weeks ago. Fared slightly better, Premier Pallister did, than Kenney, with 31% of Manitobans approving of his management. The only other premier with less than 50% satisfaction was Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe at 39%. So a tough polling here for Alberta's prairie premiers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. Just over half of respondents in Ontario approved of the job that Premier Doug Ford was doing. I wonder if that's because he let whole big groups of people get together for Christmas. I don't know. We'll see what the numbers look like in a couple of weeks. In Quebec, Premier Legault, 55% approval. In BC, Premier John Horgan is getting a thumbs up from almost 60% of respondents, 59%. And then at the Atlantic provinces, Nova Scotia's Premier Stephen McNeil on top of 78% of locals approving of his management of the pandemic. You see these sort of pandemic bumps in the polls. If the numbers are okay, if people perceive that it's kind of a steady Eddie approach from the Premier's office, the Ministry of Health premiers typically have been polling pretty well through this pandemic. It's when things start to go sideways that we see those numbers start to drop. All right, let's get to it. She is, if not, no, we're still working on getting Arlene Dickinson ready. That's no problem there. Sam, can we pull up Dr. Deena Hinshaw's availability yesterday? I wanted to put this in front of you, Real Talkers. This was really an interesting a moment, I think, yesterday in Dr. Deena Hinshaw's address to Albertans. This was an update, and of course there had been a bit of a pause, understandably so, through the Christmas break. And so this was the first that we were hearing from Dr. Deena Hinshaw in a while. And she's not one to get political. Many of you have been written into the show. We get a lot of emails at talk@ryanjesperson.com saying, you know who you should talk to, you know who you should get an interview with is Dr. Deena Hinshaw. Well, yeah, but she's not doing individual sit-downs. She does her availability. She stays out of the political muck and mire as best she can, though I suspect there's a lot of politicking that happens when you're the chief medical officer of health through a pandemic. But this raised my eyebrows just a tiny little bit yesterday when she compared Alberta. She kind of just subtly slid it in, comparing Alberta's rates to some of the other provinces. When I see stuff like that, I always kind of wonder why. Like, what's the motivation? Like, what's the reasoning behind something like this? Let's take a look.
We are not alone in this reality in Alberta either. Around the world and across our country, people are mourning the loss of their loved ones. The death rate in Quebec is 95 per 100,000. Ontario's is 30 per 100,000. Manitoba's 47, BC 16, and Alberta's is 20 per 100,000. Each of these numbers represents people whose loss leaves a hole behind in their families, communities, and groups of friends.
So that was kind of interesting yesterday. That was yesterday late afternoon, hearing Dr. Hinshaw compare some of the provinces and the rates. No, it's fact, and this is scientific data based on what they have, and the numbers are maybe a little off right now because of the lag in testing through the Christmas holidays, et cetera. But that was something that jumped out at me, and I'd be curious to know what you think. You can, of course, hit us up on our hashtag RealTalkRJ at any time on Twitter. That's the best way to communicate with us live, or, of course, on our Twitter stream, our live chat, stream that happens on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. Chad says, I'm actually a little irked by the lack of reporting over the holidays. The virus isn't pausing, and now is the time to be in front of people making decisions to gather. Well, Dr. Hinshaw touched on this. This was on Monday afternoon. Let's get to this, where she talks about the new variant, and she talks about travel, and well, she basically takes it on. Here she is.
We are watching closely. Of course, across the country, we're having conversations with colleagues in all of the other provinces and territories to make sure that we each are informed about what we're seeing and that we're taking a collaborative and coordinated approach to this. What we know right now is there is some evidence that this variant may be more infectious than other strains of the virus. And as a precaution, we're therefore making sure that we're reducing the chance that we could get importation of many of these strains. One of the things that we have done, as you likely know, is we've recommended that anyone who has been in the UK, and as you likely know, there's been an identification of a different variant, but one that has a similar mutation in South Africa recently. And so we are recommending that anyone who has been in the UK or in South Africa in the last 14 days should get a test. And in fact, we've worked with the federal government to get a list of all of those who've been in those places. And Alberta Health Services will be calling all of those individuals to offer them a test. If they consent, then they'll be helped to book that test, just to make sure that we're able to pick up if a variant does come in. We've also made sure that when people are coming in, that we are communicating to them if they otherwise would have wanted to participate in our border pilot. Unfortunately, that is not possible if they've been in the UK or in South Africa over the last 14 days, again, because we want to take a cautious approach to this particular variant.
Okay, so that was Dr. Deena Hinshaw yesterday talking about this new variant, as they're calling it, and we want to take all of this with sort of, I think, a measured approach. Now, I am not the chief medical officer of health. I am not an immunologist nor a virologist. I'm not a microbiologist or any of the other long list of esteemed careers that would be in a position to confidently speak on a matter like this. However, I will simply point out that what we've heard from expert guests indicates that they have confidence in these new vaccines, the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccines, that they are still scientifically applicable with this so-called new strain of the virus. It's rumored to be more contagious than the previous COVID-19, but the experts that we've been hearing from, including here live on the show, have been saying it's not unusual for a virus like this to mutate. It's not something that we didn't expect, and it's, of course, as best you can prepare for this. I mean, relatively speaking, we believe that we are prepared for this, say those that are certainly encouraging people to get that vaccine. Appreciate hearing from Ken. Ken is watching the show here live and read some of those approval numbers when it comes to the premiers, and Ken made a comment here that said, basically, it's ridiculous and not surprising to see the Alberta government Premier Jason Kenney in particular, polling lower, the lowest of all the Canadian premiers. He said it's ridiculous that this government hasn't accessed all the federal funds available for frontline workers. This was a story that broke in the Globe and Mail just the other day, and it's one that certainly I think is raising some eyebrows. The Globe and Mail reporting that Alberta requested far less in federal wage top-ups for essential workers than the province was eligible for. Alberta had at its disposal approximately $350 million available from the federal government. And this money, the $350 million or so, was earmarked for topping up the wages, typically the lower wages of a lot of the frontline essential workers. So we're talking about congregate care, including long-term care centers, security guards, housekeeping staff, laundry staff, people that we might not, let's be honest, real talk for a second here, people whose contributions might sometimes be overlooked and not always celebrated. When people like me with microphones are saying, let's be and I mean this sincerely, but let's be thankful for our police and our firefighters and our paramedics,
absolutely,
and the members of our military, and then everyone will say, well, yeah, but my cousin or my auntie or my sister or my husband are they're making like $16 an hour or $15 an hour, making sure that bedpans are changed, or $22 an hour, putting themselves in harm's way, in the front waiting area of the ER admitting area, these types of folks that are just as at risk, that are just as essential to the process, but aren't exactly cashing in. You know what I'm saying? This was money, federal money, earmarked for topping up those wages. But here's the thing. The provincial government had to cover a quarter of those wages. So in other words, Ottawa would contribute 3-1. And the Alberta government, we have to assume, made the decision that it didn't want to pony up for that. And so Alberta left approximately $315 million on the table of federal funds available. $30 million was requested and received from Alberta. That was right up to the threshold of where Alberta had to start kicking in. $347 million allowable. So about $320 million left on the table. And when that story broke, when that information came out, I think a lot of people are quite rightfully pissed, and I don't blame them. Let's put this conversation to a screeching halt, because it sounds like Arlene Dickinson is ready to go. We're so grateful that she's made time for us this morning. She who requires no introduction, one of Canada's most celebrated entrepreneurs. Thank you for making time for us, Arlene, and welcome to Real Talk.
Oh, thanhanks so much, Ryan. It's a pleasure. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties. I don't know what was going on.
No, you know what?
I was determined.
Sometimes they're on our end, and sometimes they're on other. And all we care about is that we get to have the conversations. May I just say, it looks like you are in some sort of fabulous chalet right now. Where are you checking in from?
I'm checking on from my cottage up actually in Ontario. So I'm not in Alberta right now. I wish I was. I love Ontario too, but I'm not in Alberta, and it's tons of snow here, like feet and feet of snow. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it looks absolutely incredible. Well, certainly Canadians from coast to coast are relatively familiar with your story, and certainly have watched you on television and have followed, I think, your insights and your advice when it comes to specifically small business ownership, entrepreneurship, and growing businesses in size and stature. It's safe to say, Arlene, that this past year has been just a kick in the teeth for business owners, regardless of the size of their businesses. What has, to get personal right out of the gates, what has the pandemic done with regards to your own ventures, and how have you weathered the storm, so to speak?
Well, it's been really interesting, Ryan. My fund, District Ventures Capital, is a fund that invests in the food and health space and consumer goods in that space. And so, a lot of the companies that we have supported with capital and marketing services for the fund have actually done quite well through the pandemic, because they're focused on health and wellness and food and beverages. And so for the most part, they've been able to keep up with the demand of all the retailers. On the other side of that coin, there's other businesses that I have that have not done as well, that have really struggled to keep up with this and to find a way to manage through it. And I have to say that I think if it wasn't for the CERB, many of those businesses would have really struggled to be able to survive. So, there's definitely a need for the government assistance that we've got. And certainly, in some cases, these businesses have been able to fare through it okay.
I'll keep this question sort of as open-ended as possible because I don't want to kind of pigeonhole where you can take your answer. But it's always interesting for me in speaking with entrepreneurs. The one common thread that I find, at least with the ones that I know, the ones that I would call friends, is that they, for the most part, like to see the government get out of the way. That's kind of the general approach that they've taken to business and government involvement. But this year has obviously been so different, where we're talking about things like wage supports, emergency response benefits, loans, some interest-free loans, et cetera. How would you evaluate what your expectations would be of government? We can talk provincial and federal, wherever you like. And then what would you think an astute plan would look like moving forward, a post-pandemic plan? I mean, there's all kinds of opinions on how extreme that needs to be with regards to a reinvention.
Yeah, listen, I think it's critical right now that the government is supporting businesses and people the way it is. In fact, I would say that probably more support is needed than is being given. And while I'm very cognizant of the debt implication of that, I don't believe that we can negate the impact that this pandemic has had on entrepreneurs and small business in general, and on what I would call, our innovation economy. The idea that we have a nation that is founded on supporting and encouraging and growing entrepreneurialism and small business, because it is, we say all the time, it's the backbone of our country. And yet, these small businesses right now are shut down. So if we're going to shut these businesses down, which, that's a whole other discussion, if they are going to be shut down, then they have to be supported. Now, having said that, I do want to just take a second and say that, these small businesses that are shut down, while big businesses are remaining open who sell the same goods, I think is really problematic. I think there needed to be a better way to deal with the quarantining, the shutting down, the managing of that. There's no reason why small business couldn't have also implemented all sorts of safety precautions and safety measures at this, and what I see now happening. I'm kind of adding to your question a little bit, Ryan,
That's
but
great.
I think they're really connected. You can't say to big business, you stay open because you're essential, and then say to small business, you shut down because you're not, and then have them selling the exact same goods. So there is a real issue there that I think has to be addressed. But I do want to come back to, if we have to be cautious, we have to be prudent, we have to be careful through this pandemic. Obviously, I mean, I'm certainly on the side of wear masks, don't be careful, and all the things that the health officials are telling us to do. I am also very aware of the impact the pandemic's having on small business. So do I think government should support? Yes, I do think government should support. Do I think it's doing enough? No, I don't think there's enough happening yet. I think we've got to think about the future. I think we've got to think about how these businesses are going to get back to their pre-pandemic revenue numbers. Yeah. I mean, right now they're just staying barely open, or if at all. Many of them, I think I heard 7,500 small businesses are going to shut down. So when you've got that number of businesses that are going to close because of the pandemic, then what you've got to do is figure out how you can get them not just to hibernate right now, but to be able to be successful post-pandemic. So how are we going to help these businesses scale back up? I mean, we can't just, snap our fingers and have the economy come back exactly the way it was. And that is my biggest concern right now.
Yeah, and certainly there's not a chance you're alone on that. We spoke prior to you. We were talking to the mayor of Banff, Karen Sorensen, who sends her warm greetings, by the way. She was excited to hear that you were on the same broadcast. She said she'll be watching this interview. But we were talking to her worship about rebuilding Banff's economy and what that might look like. And I don't know if I suspect Banff might be an advantageous position where, restaffing a lot of these ventures and recruiting visitors and tourists to spend their money might be less of an effort, because the place kind of sells itself. Not to suggest there's not work to be done, but I, along with you, and I'm sure thousands of others, am more concerned about, the restaurants, the small independent retailers, the clothing shops, the niche markets that, we take a look and maybe they got a break on their rent, or maybe they were able to kind of do what they could to adapt. And we've seen really inspiring examples of that. But they're starting now, when we start talking about a recovery, and Mayor Sorensen said she figures even in this summer to come, there will still be people aware of distancing, still wearing masks. So consumer confidence, whatever that actually means, could be a year away from now. And I can't imagine for a lot of these small business owners, and I'm not trying to be the dark rain cloud over them as they're watching and listening right now, but I can't imagine what that feeling would be like, hearing that, you got to weather the storm for another year. I don't know how these folks are still going. How have you weathered? I mean, I know I'm sure over the years you've seen a ton of adversity in your career or in the careers of people that you've partnered with. Are there some principles that have kept you focused and motivated and optimistic?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. My last book, Reinvention, focuses on some of the things that businesses and people can do to struggle through particularly challenging times in our lives and in our businesses. And so I talk a lot about thinking about what we've learned from the past, bringing that forward, but not bringing all of the baggage with us, but bringing our lessons forward with us. I talk about figuring out what we're good at, our currency. I talk about thinking about our why. Why do we get up every day and do what we do? And then I talk about the context of the world we're operating in and how you can actually think about what you're doing every day in the context of today's world. And I do want to say that a lot of that, when I talk about how these businesses need to survive, I do believe that, of course, I mean, everyone's talking about the need to get digital and everybody's talking about the need to ensure that your e-commerce is working properly. And everyone's talking about the need to, have curbside pickup, et cetera. And all of these things are really important. All of these things also take time and money and resources. And so another big gap that I am finding is that data, big data in particular, that's usually held by large corporations and large industries, is not being made accessible and available to small businesses to be able to compete on, Google search and all of these things that are going on so that you can be online and have success. So it is complex. It requires determination, but I do believe that small businesses and small business owners and entrepreneurs are very innovative. They will find a way through this. We have a lot of grit and determination. We are more flexible and more able to address these challenges in a different way, perhaps, than big business can because they have deeper pockets. But we have, I'd say, the ability to move quickly and swiftly and to be able to I just think to be able to adapt a little more quickly than a big business can.
I love this. Kim is watching us live on YouTube right now. She says, Arlene wouldn't know this. She says, but she was one of the first most influential women in my career. Kim says, I only was able to be in a room with her and watch her closely, but I experienced her strength and poise when I was a young woman getting started in advertising. She says, I'm so grateful for that. That's a pretty cool message, I would imagine, to hear something like that.
Oh, that's like that just made my day. Tell her thank you so much. We do the best we can, and even as I talk right now, I think, I should say that differently or whatever. But the real thing is to just be yourself and to show up, as best you can each and every day. And right now in particular, I think it's very important that we all show up.
Yeah, no kidding. I loved one of your tweets. I'm going to butcher it. I don't remember it exactly, but you said something like 2020 has been quite the century, which kind of felt like when I look back to January of 2020 as compared to now, it feels like I can't even believe all the stuff that's happened. It's been a hell of a year. One of the things that 2020 marked was the wrap. You've just wrapped season 15 of Dragon's Den on CBC, which is absolutely wild. What a journey. What have you seen? I mean, this is a kind of a big question, but with regards to how have pitches and business models evolved in the 15 seasons that Dragon Den's been on the air? I mean, think of the so many things have transformed and changed.
It's just been such a journey. I mean, I am so grateful for the opportunity I've had to be on that show and to have a front row seat to what's happened to entrepreneurialism in Canada. I mean, over those 15 years, entrepreneurialism has become much more, I'd say, revered and respected and admired. And in some respects, what's happened is people have found courage from that show. I believe that it's given people a chance to really think about what they're capable of and to try. And I love that about the show. I mean, I love the, tens of thousands of deals that I've seen in 15 years. It's just been, honestly, Ryan, we are surrounded in Canada by such innovation and such, as I said, grit, determination, but it's been phenomenal. And it has changed. The businesses are bigger. The ideas are broader. The technology has certainly permeated everything. It's just been fascinating.
So do you, are you the type to make a New Year's resolution? Is that something you've done, or do you hate that kind of stuff?
I don't, but I can tell you that the pandemic has made me certainly be much more aware and cognizant of the things I can do as a human to try and support other people more than, I'd like to think I was always kind of aware, but maybe not enough. And I've really learned, like we have to pay more attention to our neighbors and our community and to the things that are going on and to show kindness. And so I would say I've learned a lot about myself this year. And so it doesn't take a day like New Year's Eve to make you contemplate. And the one thing the pandemic has given us is the gift of time to consider who we are and what we want from our lives and what we want from our society and what we need from this world. And so it's not about a day, you guys, it's about every day. And it's about getting up and thinking about what do we want from this world? What are we going to accept? What are we going to say is okay, when we see things? What are we going to sit down and not talk about and not stand up for? I mean, gone are the days of you can't talk about politics or religion or anything. You need to talk about all of those things. You need to talk about people that don't, agree with you, and you need to talk to those people that don't agree with you. And so my New Year's resolution, no, I don't do that, but I have really found more resolve this year than I think I've had in a long, long time.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I think for me personally, 2020 has been a total reset. I don't think that there's been an area of my life that's not been touched. And it's really remarkable. And I don't think I'm even going to really realize some of the impacts, except for looking back with maybe the luxury of even more time and looking back maybe 5 years from now or 10 years from now and saying, wow, did that ever change in 2020 in that pandemic year? Let me ask you this in closing. We're so grateful for your time, Arlene, and it's just a real thrill to welcome you here to the show. Your name always pops up when people speculate about political leadership. And
Ryan.
I know, but I have to ask you, because here's the thing. You're on a very short list, Arlene, of potential politicians, of leaders that appeal to people on the left and the right. Some of my friends that are small C conservatives, some of them are small L liberals, and some of them have capital letters there too. Party members would love to see you get involved. Could you ever find yourself in that type of situation?
I've learned one thing in my life, and that is to never say never. And so, I'm so busy right now with building a fund and a platform that I think is so important to our nation. I want to build a platform, $1 billion platform that's going to help companies take their products and put them into the marketplace. And it's particularly in agriculture and health, so agri-food and health related. So that's really my purpose right now. But I think a lot about what's going on in our country. And I think a lot about what's happening. And I don't know, maybe right now isn't the best time for me. I'm getting older though, Ryan, so maybe I'll never happen. I just never say never. But right now, I don't know. I'm pretty happy doing it.
Okay, well, all I'm going to take from that is never say never. And then we're just going to roll with that. Arlene, thank you so much for this. Really appreciate you fitting us into your morning, and enjoy what looks like an absolutely beautiful surrounding there, and a very happy New Year to you.
Same to you, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me on and letting me talk.
You got it. That's Arlene Dickinson, obviously a very high-profile entrepreneur and business support. I mean, isn't it interesting? You learn things about what fuels some of these people that if you were to say, who are some of the most prominent entrepreneurs in Canada, Arlene Dickinson would be on most people's lists. And so I'm always curious to pick her brain, pick other people's, be like, what is it that makes you tick? How do you face adversity? What do you see as the role of government? And then, of course, would you ever see yourself getting involved? Had an interesting exchange with some people the other day talking about, who would make good politicians. And I don't think that what we take, the primary thing we take from this conversation with Arlene Dickinson is that she's interested in politics. The question was at the very end for a reason. But what does draw... or what is good for the general public when it comes to the draw of politics and who is drawn to politics? And got into kind of an interesting exchange with some folks on Twitter. I knew who some of them were. I didn't know who some of them were, but the coolest part about it was that the conversation kept reaching, more and more people that were chiming in with, more and more diverse perspectives. And the idea being that, some people were saying that, if you're going to get involved in politics, we should say no to the wealthy. In other words, you'd have to cap it at a net worth of $10 million. If you're worth more than $10 million, you can't get involved in politics. I mean, it sort of starts to resemble kindergarten games here. Wait, I have more rules. I'm going to make more rules. It's like, how are you going to enforce this? It's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. But the theory, the premise of it, some folks were saying it's, when the wealthy are involved in politics, they're only going to legislate things that are beneficial to the wealthy, and that doesn't help the common folks like us. And then the other idea might be that if people have built up a large net worth and they're financially secure and comfortable, it would indicate, number one, that they've kind of figured a few things out, that they're street smart, they're wise, they've understood how to build business, they understand how to sort of roll out a plan, to have a business plan, and then to manifest that plan, make it happen, and find success, and that would be a good thing. And then others would suggest that perhaps politicians shouldn't earn any salary whatsoever, right? And we sort of go down that road. Other folks were suggesting that maybe you should have certain quotas that you try to fill when it comes to gender equality or equality of folks' backgrounds, whether it's a religious backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds or cultural perspectives that people bring to the table. I mean, there are these types of conversations to be had that I think are very important. We had a wonderful conversation, a roundtable just last week with the three mayors out of Sturgeon County and Red Deer and St. Albert, and it was wonderful to check in with Tara Veer and Alana Nachu and Kathy Heron and talk about their perspectives on women in politics as an example. So all of these conversations are good conversations to be had. I think what it really, kind of the overarching theme here is, how do we feel, or how do we get to a point where we feel like our interests and society's best interests are being represented? If we expect government to develop intuitive policy on things like immigration, wouldn't it make sense to have Canadians or Albertans, Western Canadians, wherever you're listening to us from, that have been immigrants to Canada, that understand what that's like? If we want to talk about matters like we talked about with Mayor Sorensen, reconciliation, Indigenous relations, we need more Indigenous Canadians involved in politics. There are really exciting things happening in Alberta. I think of Councillor Catherine Swampy, just south of Edmonton, who's a leader in her community and is doing remarkable things. And I mean, there are dozens, hundreds of examples, but we know there needs to be more. We need to have people that represent communities that are representative of Canada. And that's what it all comes down to. I know a lot of people would like to see Arlene Dickinson involved in some form of politics moving forward. Are we good to go with our next guest? I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Guy Felicella is one of the more compelling speakers that I've heard as of late. I had an opportunity to watch a couple of his TED Talks, and his opening line, at least on one of them, just stopped me in my tracks. I didn't know much about Guy, but the fact of the matter is he spent years in the grips of addiction, and now he's dedicated his career, and it's his personal passion, to advocating for harm reduction and removing the stigma against addiction and substance users. Guy, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to Real Talk. Thank you for making time for us this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ryan.
So I'm watching this TED Talk of yours from earlier this year, and you say, "I have died and been brought back to life 6 times." And I just went, whoa.
Yeah, it's life's been a wild ride for sure. I mean, to experience, the punishing impacts of substance use and addiction in my life has probably been, one of the most challenging things I've ever had to battle back from, and especially the toll that it takes being brought back to life, those repeated 6 times in a 9-month period were just, mentally and physically and spiritually destructive. And it got me to a place that eventually I realized that, I was either going to die or I was going to die trying to get out. And for me, I just had this, will inside that, I'd witnessed many friends lose the battle. And, we'd always talked about, even in our struggles, about doing something else besides this. We just couldn't, our intent was to do it, which is so hard to do. And, I just didn't want to be a statistic. And so I battled to leave that lifestyle. And it took 30 years to do that.
30 years. I mean, you are walking, living, breathing proof that harm reduction measures work. I mean, that's the power of a story. You're not, and with respect to scientists and researchers, and we need public health professionals, et cetera. I'm not saying we don't, but you don't come to the table with theory that has not been practiced. You're saying, listen, I may very well have and probably would have been dead had my life not had an opportunity to walk down the path that it is currently walking down. To give us a clear understanding, Guy, of your journey, and I know you've told your story hundreds, if not thousands of times to captive audiences, but when it comes to substance use and addiction issues and everything that led you to where you are now, delivering TED Talks and doing really high profile advising work on saving people's lives, where did it all begin? Like, how did this all get started for you? You've told stories of your friends that were injured on construction sites, were prescribed opioids. How about with you?
Well, mine started with just childhood trauma at an early age, and it developed into anxiety, depression, and self-hatred. And, I wasn't diagnosed with anything at an early age. I was later on in life. I'd struggled with ADHD and a mild comprehension disorder, and I used substances to cope. And what had happened is, I was punished for using illicit drugs to try to cope with trauma and pain. And when I started venturing into the downtown east side, harm reduction wasn't even a word. So I've seen it evolve since the early 90s. And really not just, listen, it's not just that I was brought back to life 6 times because of harm reduction, but also, 5 osteomyelitis, life-threatening bone infections, 4 in my left leg, 1 in my back, where I had to learn how to walk again. The HIV crisis and the overdose crisis in the 90s that I battled through as well. And then the punishment of being, homeless for that amount of time. It's just, the astronomical challenges for somebody to ask for, to try to receive help. But I was never offered, help that would work for me. I was offered incarceration, and that's where a lot of it happens, is that and the life that I have today would not exist without harm reduction. And it's so vital for people to understand that recovery is a great aspect of trying to help people who struggle with addiction. But if you look at the majority of people, they don't have a substance use disorder, or they don't have an addiction, but they use drugs. And so not everybody is addicted to them, but everybody's at risk with this contaminated drug supply that's ripping the world. And so sending people into recovery is often, especially to get off drugs. If your goal is to try to get off drugs, listen, I don't sugarcoat it to people. It's probably one of the hardest battles that I've ever endured in my life. And it took me 30 years to actually get 1 year off those drugs. So when you think about the process of recovery, if you're going to go into recovery for 4 months, and then, it's such a process. Yes, some people can get it the first time. Some people can get it after the 30th time. Some people, that's not their goal. And so, putting everything into recovery services is at the expense of harm reduction. It just doesn't make sense, because if you expect people to improve the quality of their lives, they have to be alive to do that. And that's why vital harm reduction services are so important in our society.
Guy, I want to make sure that that people have a clear understanding of what we're talking about. So when you say, basically what you're saying in plain language is that, if I can call it, crudely like detox, although that's sort of I ignores a lot of the approaches here, but detox versus supervised consumption sites, right? That's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about, like, if you can say to somebody, hey, if you can go dry or you can go clean or you can come to our addiction recovery retreat center where you'll be there for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or 6 months or whatever the case may be, versus here's safe supply. In other words, it'll be government overseen, government provided safe supply of narcotics and a safe, or as safe as possible, venue with medical supervision and social service support to continue to use drugs in as safe a scenario as possible while building a relationship with healthcare. These are kind of the two models, right? From a civilian standpoint, did I do okay in characterizing them?
Yeah, fairly good. Yes.
So what works when it comes to, I mean, there's political measures at play here, and BC is different than Alberta, is different than Ontario. But what doesn't work with what you're seeing with regards to political approaches here, and why?
Well, I mean, I think the one challenge is also the medical system, because for safe supply to be, it's really contingent on a prescriber. If a prescriber feels comfortable in prescribing, and usually what, they're trained differently. They're trained to cause no harm. And yet then they also have this other side where they're involved in the substance use disorder aspect of it, where they believe that offering these, potent narcotics could cause harm. But the reality is that if they're not offered these safer drugs, that they're going to cause more harm by using the contaminated drugs and, die because of it. I think, the medical system, that the safe supply is it works for some, however, it won't work for everybody. And like I said, to make it more accessible for people, we need another pathway as well outside of the medical system, whether that's kind of how the approach with cannabis and other substances, et cetera, that they've alcohol, you can buy it in a store. You can buy cannabis now in a store, and the same thing needs to happen with the illicit drugs, especially the ones that are killing people. And I think if you look at Switzerland's done really well with a heroin-assisted treatment program there, and in a country that has around 8.5 million people, they have 1,700 people that are on heroin-assisted treatment. Canada is 4 times the size of Switzerland, but yet only has 130 people on heroin across the country. And we are in a complete collapse. Our drug policy has gone from a complete defeat to a debacle.
What makes it such a debacle in your assessment?
Well, it's just drug policy is really it doesn't even allow harm reduction to actually do its, full impact. If harm reduction was exempt from the drug policies that exist, then you could actually provide people with safer drugs, exempt from the drug policy that exists in our society today. I'll tell you, we definitely wouldn't have, especially in our province, see 5 people dying every day, and across the country, we wouldn't see 15 people dying every day either.
Like it's the numbers are astounding. 15 people a day. I mean, I've seen the opioid crisis described as Canada's other health epidemic, and certainly you can fairly say that. I mean, the numbers show that, and we also try to remind ourselves every time we talk about numbers, these are people. These are human beings. But Guy, a lot of what you're talking about, we've spoken with Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, and we've spoken with health experts, Dr. Arlene Dickinson and Hakik Farani and others about different approaches to this. And I think every single person has acknowledged that it would require political will. And you would think that a politician, a leader, let me say the Prime Minister, for example, would be able to step in front of Canadians and say, 15 of us are dying every day. And for the most part, although you may take issue with this, I don't know, but for the most part, they strike me as preventable deaths. We're going to have to take drastic action. And you would think that a general population would say, whatever you need to do, let's do it. Let's talk to the experts. Let's implement the policy. Let's invest in harm reduction, and let's save people's lives. Am I oversimplifying it? Is it just a lack of political will?
I think, politics is definitely playing a huge part of it. But if you look even in countries like Switzerland, too, I think, it took politics to actually get it to 1,700 people as well. So you have both sides that, you just need somebody to step up and be bold enough to speak about it. And especially a leader like our prime minister. I know he's outspoken in saying that he supports safe supply. Well, I would challenge anybody that says that they support safer supply then to create a domestic supply of pharmaceutical alternatives here in Canada and make substances such as heroin and put programs across the country so that people can have access to the service. Because I always say this, that if you're going to give drug users the least sought after drugs that people aren't using, then they will continue to access the contaminated ones and they will die because of it. And another thing that happens too is that politically, when governments are outspoken on just one aspect, such as recovery, what happens is that it puts harm reduction at the expense of harm reduction, which you can't support people when they're in recovery, but then when they are using drugs, be completely unsupportive of them. It just doesn't make sense. It's a full spectrum of care that we need, and we need all aspects in order for people to receive the help that they need, but also to improve the quality of their lives. And one of the biggest things with SCSs and OPSs is that a lot of society believes that they're not working, and it's because they see, people all in the area or gathering in the area. Well, SCS is life-saving for the overdose crisis. It saves lives. Yeah. However, it doesn't address poverty and homelessness. And so that is another aspect. With supervised consumption sites, they don't alleviate homelessness and poverty either.
Yeah, we have a great comment here. It's great to see people that are watching this live, but Joel is watching. He says, the idea that the unhoused or those that are addicted can get their lives back without assistance from government is ridiculous. That from Joel. We're talking to Guy Felicella on our hashtag here on Twitter, Real Talk RJ. It's amazing to see my good friend Petra Schultz from Mums Stop the Harm. She's watching. I knew your face would, every time I hear her name, my face smiles. She says our good friend and recovery ally. Good to see him on Real Talk today. She says this is not to be missed. Guy, in just a moment, I want to talk to you about reducing stigma, because I know that's a big part of the work you do. Of course, you at home, our audience knows that our hashtag Real Talk RJ is powered by the folks at Park Power, and we're thrilled to have them supporting these important conversations that we have each and every day. You may have heard us announce just earlier this week that Park Power is dangling a carrot for you Real Talkers that are looking to maybe move your business when it comes to electricity, natural gas, and internet. They're in all three hustles. They have been for the last 7 or 8 years, proudly owned and operating out of Alberta, Canada. That's where the call center is. That's where the customer service center is. And that's where the nonprofits are, the charities that benefit from Park Power's profit sharing. But here's the deal. If you take your business over to Park Power and you use the promo code 2021-Real Talk, 2021-Real Talk, you'll receive $70 off your first bill. No questions asked. That's what you get for using that promo code, and we're grateful. We're talking business or residential services. Also very grateful to be partnered up with Clean Air Club. Sam and I here in the studio breathe easier. We asked them to do an audit for us, and they've implemented measures here, including an air purification system. They told us the most important thing you can do at home so your family can breathe more easy in 2021 is make sure you're paying attention to your furnace filters. Sign up at cleanairclub.ca. They take care of the rest. You tell them the size of the filter you need. They deliver those filters to your home. They keep you on schedule. And of course, they support small business along the way with a little gift, as many of you know, many of you that have signed up at cleanairclub.ca. We're talking to Guy Felicella. Guy's a peer clinical advisor with the BC Centre on Substance Use. He's a survivor himself, more than a 30-year journey, as he's described to us. Guy, we know a big part of this conversation has to be on reducing stigma, and I hate to have to cut to the, typically what people trot out is they say, it's not just folks downtown, it's not just the homeless population. And when we make those arguments, I sit there and think, well, that devalues the lives of people that are between housing. that devalues it. We say, oh, it's not just the homeless. Here's why you should care about it. I mean, it's almost like that's been the societal attitude. How do you hit this head on? I mean, how do you make tangible, meaningful progress in eradicating or addressing, anyway, stigma?
Yeah, well, I mean, stigma is created by structural stigma, which is created by bad drug policies, which fuels the general population stigma, which and then cripples the person who uses drugs, such as the substance user themselves. And the government, loves to put these ad campaigns, but they're the ones that started the stigma in the first place by creating these policies in place. And so one of the biggest things that we need to do to start reducing stigma is decriminalize all drugs, all illicit drugs, so that people don't have to, isolate in their tremendous amount of, society pointing fingers. I mean, there's just the crippling aspects. I often say this, my overcoming addiction was just one of the biggest battles, but the other biggest battle was surviving the stigma, the discrimination, and the relentless punishment from bad drug policies that nearly ended my life 6 times. And if you think about it, having just to survive the bad drug policies, but then to battle through and to survive through your addiction, no person should ever have to go through this. And that's why we need to remove the criminal justice aspect of punishing substance users and move to a supportive model to support people. This, by decriminalizing drugs, will actually start the process of reducing stigma.
I'm paying keen attention to what our audience members are saying as they're watching now live on YouTube. And it's amazing to see Ewan Thompson watching. I know Ewan and his team at Raft Beer Labs have done what they can to ensure that businesses, Alberta-based businesses, are contributing to reducing stigma, to providing resources as part of their commitment to community. He says reducing stigma in response to a listener, James, who said reducing stigma comes from the top. It'll take a generation to do so. Ewan says, it can also come from the bottom. We are all drug users. And the more that we open up about it, the less people feel like they need to use in the shadows where it's more dangerous. So that's kind of an interesting back and forth. It's got to come from the top. It can come from the bottom. It can come from the everyday people. Where do you land on that?
Well, for sure. I mean, we obviously the first place that it does often come from is the drug user side, the push from the activists, the advocates, the health professionals that continue to, try to push the system into looking at change. But we also need people up top to actually, the ones that are in power. It's an interesting thing when people are in power, they hold on to that power and yet don't make any changes. And, I often ask politicians this, did you do it because you wanted the power, or do you do it because you want to make changes? And in our society right now, these changes are continuing to destroy our families, our friends, our communities, the workforce, the economy, everything. I mean, it's just a series of events that's happened over the last, 20 years, but especially since the drug supply became so toxic, and will continue to, end more people's lives tragically. And these are preventable deaths. And until we actually push the system and have somebody up top say, okay, yes, here we go. We need to people to have access to safer drugs. And a good place to start for them is we have these beautiful SCSs and OPSs that should be in every single community across our province or our country. And yet we allow people to bring in their contaminated drugs and use them there, but we'll bring them back to life. Shouldn't we actually just give them the safer drugs when they're coming into these facilities?
Yeah. Guy, I don't want to, my brother would be better equipped to tell this story. He has done in past. My brother Kyle works at Insight in Vancouver, and he's told me, and I hope I'm not oversimplifying or missing details, but he told me anecdotally that they're able to test drugs on site. That would indicate whether or not it's I hesitate to use the word safe, but that to give the person who's about to use this drugs and understanding what they're getting into. And he said that they've had times that have sort of hit him between the eyes where a drug has tested or has indicated by way of the test that it could be potentially life-altering or life-ending. In other words, the test indicates that this is a toxic chemical concoction. And he said that the relationship of this person with that drug is so evident in that person would continue or would make the decision to proceed with injecting that toxic drug, which to me is A, indicative of the power of that narcotic, and B, really, really heartbreaking, but a huge reality check. I mean, that's anecdotal, but that one really struck me.
Well, if you even look at my life, so 6 overdoses, 20 years of being homeless, 5 osteomyelitis bone infections, and numerous other infections that would have ended my life numerous times. It still did not stop me, not with all the recovery services that exist. It still did not stop me from continuing to use over and over again. What did stop me was the amount of compassion and empathy that took 30 years of people chipping away at a prison wall that I built around myself. And finally, the last incident, February 18th, where I was brought back to life in 2013 at a supervised consumption site. And I woke up and I was out for about 10 minutes. The nurse was crying because she didn't think I was going to come back. And I said, "Why are you crying?" She just said to me, "Guy, I care about you." And at that moment, that last little, there was not one moment, there was so many moments of people that showed me that, that I was a human being and that I mattered in their lives, that finally just shattered broke the dam, and the water just pushed through. And, a month later, it was the last time that I used illicit drugs, but it's such a journey, and the power of human connection. And that's what harm reduction is. It's just such a powerful human connection that changes the direction of people's lives. It's a non-judgmental approach that just loves people for using drugs and where they're at, and tries to do the best at reducing the harms caused by those drugs. And that's, I've been beaten the scars that are riddled through my body. I often say that I could just never forget in my lifetime, just how powerful harm reduction really is, and just how more of our society needs to start implementing it in everything that we do.
I'm looking at, let me hold this up to the camera because I don't have my my actual digital stuff set up. Sam's going to just roll his eyes at this because we can do this better, but I'm just checking out. I hope that comes across. I'm just looking at your family photo, my man. Look at that. 3 beautiful children. I mean, life is good, my brother. You talk about being brought back to life in 2013, and I would imagine that probably feels like an eternity ago with regards to the progress you've made and where you're at, but also it provides hope because it's actually not that long ago. And I mean, here you are just doing an unbelievable job. And let me read this. I'm taking a look at our hashtag at Real Talk RJ. I'm so glad that Emily Dugas is watching, and she says, vocabulary is so important in regards to stigma. And Guy, I'll get back to her too. I want to be a sponge, and I want to change and evolve my language as necessary. I want to be part of this growth as a society, and I want to be part of the life-saving effort we can all be part of. Emily says, we have to stop calling these deaths overdoses. She says the word suggests like choice or intent, or that folks have, taken too much. She says these are poisoned drugs, period. That from Emily. There's one example of one thing we can change to address stigma.
Yeah, well, Emily's right. Really, the root cause behind it all is really the bad drug policy. I mean, that's the driving factor. And that's the government's making a choice not to change those drug policies. So that's the part that needs to be changed. And, honestly, if you look at just the iron laws of prohibition, the harder the enforcement, the harder the drugs. And if you think our stop right now is at, fentanyl or carfentanil, no, if we continue this pattern, the drugs will continue to get increasingly toxic. And, you don't need a tolerance for fentanyl. It doesn't matter. I used heroin for decades, never overdosed once. And then in 2012, when I started buying fentanyl, I'd overdosed 6 times in 9 months. And then that was in 2012. And it's gotten increasingly worse over the last 8 years.
When we talk about stigma, it can manifest itself, I think, in public attitudes. It can manifest itself in interpersonal communication, obviously in government policy at a municipal or provincial or federal level, but also with regards to corporations. I was impressed to see you share, and people can follow you on Twitter at Guy Felicella. You can check out guyfelicella.com. But you shared a letter that you received December 16th of this year from a life insurance provider, from Manulife, that had essentially pulled your coverage because of your past history. I would imagine that would feel like a punch in the gut. It would probably anger some people. Can you take us into that experience when you opened that envelope? Did you see this coming?
Well, I was told that, by our financial advisor that, it's just you're a relatively healthy guy. That's what they'll base it on. And, they'll ask questions. And, here I have it. You can't, I live a life with integrity. So I was honest and with the questions. And when we got the letter, my wife was actually approved the next day for life insurance. And me, it was like a couple weeks. And they called me back even a couple more times. And just the questions that they asked were so stigmatizing, like asking me to describe events of my criminal history and describe if my addiction, if I needed follow-up treatment with it. And, I'm telling her, like, look, lady, it's a life journey. Yes, I made some errors in my life, but who hasn't? And then getting the letter that says I'm just being denied on the 2 aspects of my criminal history and my drug using history. It's, you read something like that, and the life insurance isn't for me. It's for my 3 beautiful kids and my wife. If something were to happen to me, it's for the protection of my family, and to understand. It was very hurtful, but not only that. Where I think even more so is that I have 3 young kids, and I don't want them to grow up in a world that chooses to be so judgmental towards people because of their past. And that's one of the things that I fight for. I don't just fight for my kids. I fight for everybody's kids. And I fight for the lost friends and I fight for the moms that lost their children. I fight, and I will continue to fight until there's no breath left in me. It's just, I've gone down this path, and really, I describe it to people. It's that the punishment that I had to endure, the crushing punishment that I had to endure, really put me in a place where today it's very good, and I'm very compassionate and empathetic towards people. I don't put expectations on people, and I don't fix people. People find a way to fix themselves. I support them, and there's a difference between trying to do that. When I support people, that means I'm empowering them to choose their journey, and I'm just going to support them. And whether that means getting them safe supply, whether that means getting them housing, whether that means whatever it is that they want to recover from, I just want to be there on that journey. And I know how don't sugarcoat recovery as saying that it's like rainbows and leprechauns, and your life becomes this amazing immediately. It's such a process, and it's a battle that that I try to explain to people, that it's not one that's easy. If you look at my life, it took me 30 years to get there, and I just had the desire inside to continue to battle through the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. And finally, it was just a bunch of people that supported me through that journey that And guess what? The harm reduction movement that started in the 90s was actually only one person. Her name was Liz Evans, that started the Portland Housing Society. And I remember her just giving me a syringe and water. She said, "Do you want one?" I thought she was going to charge me for it, because that's how it was back then. They would charge you for these things. And she said, "No, I want to give you one." And I was just like, "What?" And she says, "Listen, I don't care that you use drugs. I just want you to use them safely." And I just was like, I just wanted to give her a hug, because that was the first moment of compassion in my life that made me believe that, hey, I'm a human being, and I live in this society. And even though I have my challenges, I'm still a human being.
Guy, I'm so grateful you've joined us today. I want to wrap with this. When we talk about stigma, when we talk about supports, when we talk about empathy and treating people like you've just described, you began this conversation with us talking about your journey and childhood trauma that you sustained. We've been facilitating conversations on safe supply and supervised consumption, and ever since this show, the show is an infant. It's only 6 weeks old, but we've had these conversations, and it's gleaned some interesting feedback, including from one of my favorite NHL hockey players of all time, back on December 19th, Theron Fleury, who has lived out loud, certainly, and who has experienced his own journey. And if I remember correctly, I think Theron just marked 5,000 days of sobriety himself. But he reached out on December 19th. He tweeted at me, and he said, "We're talking about systemic trauma." He said, "Thousands of years worth. Trauma is at the core of every single issue we have in society, especially addiction. Unresolved trauma is the cause of addiction, emotional pain, and suffering. What can we do better as a society and as individuals to better address trauma?"
Yeah, no, it's Sharon's right. I actually just posted on Twitter. That's really the driving force behind addiction. And, if you think about it, you have somebody that's impacted by trauma, whether it was childhood trauma or abuse, and then they're using drugs or alcohol because of it. Then we as a society come on and add more layers of trauma to that person. You can understand why the systemic barriers that exist for people to reach out and receive help. I mean, even when you first meet somebody, especially with substance use disorder, mental health, or trauma, they have this baggage of trauma that they're carrying with them. And immediately we push more trauma on them by telling them that, this is not something that we do here, or we can't help. What I really think that what we need is trauma therapy needs to be covered by MSP, because even when you go into recovery, for me, what stuck this time, I didn't go to treatment. I went to, inpatient treatment. I went to outpatient treatment, and I met a trauma therapist. And I tell you, it was amazing. And I established my relationship with the substances. And really what had happened is that where she got me to a place is that, I got to a place there myself. Is the hardest thing for me to say was, you are not responsible for the trauma that you endured as a child, but you are responsible to pass on the healing instead of passing on more trauma. And it took me, years to actually believe that. And because the systemic barriers and the systemic trauma that impacts generation to generation to generation, just remember that we as a society and as people cannot pass on more trauma, because that relives the old trauma, and new trauma will do that. You'll be triggered by your old trauma. What we need to do is be more empathetic and compassionate to understand that And trauma-informed practice isn't trauma therapy either. And that's why I'm advocating right now that trauma therapy be covered under the MSP, because it was actually the biggest impact of why I managed to dramatically turn my life around. But not only that, understand my relationship with the substances, and that I didn't need to use them anymore to cope with the trauma that I'd endured for so many years. But this is an ongoing process, and I still go to trauma therapy every twice a week. And unfortunately, I mean, luckily for me, I do have benefits, but those benefits do run out, and then I have to pay out of pocket as well. And so if we really want to get to the root causes of addiction, then we're going to have to start addressing the trauma. And really, these recovery centers, they do well at addressing some of the surface stuff. But let me tell you, it doesn't take 4 months to go into treatment and then walk out of there and be, trauma-free. This is a lifetime battle, and there's you just don't get trauma supports going to an AA or an NA meeting. You need to have that included in the continuum in practice. And if we are serious at, we don't have, we have you look at, people often say, we have this addiction problem. I often say, well, what we have is an unaddressed trauma problem.
Guy, we're so blessed to have had the opportunity to welcome you to the program today and to hear you speak from the perspective that you speak from, which is incredibly powerful. I want to let our listeners know that they can follow you on Twitter at Guy Felicella. We've linked to that from my Twitter account when we went on the air this morning. You can check out guyfelicella.com. And I encourage you, if what you're hearing from Guy is inspiring you, you can easily find, just Google his name, you can find his TED Talks. Well worth the time and investment there of your time to come to a better understanding of this incredibly important subject matter. Thank you for this, and we'll wish you a happy new year and look forward to the next time our paths cross.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. You have a great day and keep up the good work.
You as well. What an amazing story. That's incredible. And I love that Guy reiterates that his journey is not complete. He still attends trauma therapy sessions twice a week. We understand that there are barriers to counseling and barriers to mental health and trauma supports for people, including just the straight up dollars and cents of it all. I want to get to some of your comments here, live comments left on our YouTube comment thread. But first, I want to recognize the partners that support us each and every day that make conversations like this possible. And that includes the remarkable ownership team at Dairy Queen in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. There's 6 of them. These are our ride or die sponsors. These are the ones that have communicated with us and said, we just want to make sure that Canadians are having conversations that matter. And that includes Mark and Michael, the ownership team, and of course the team of incredible employees that continue to show up each and every day to keep Albertans fed at the 6 Dairy Queens in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Make sure you show them your support. Also, so grateful for the team at Westworld Computers. We've just upgraded a lot of the thoroughbreds in our stable, so to speak. Sam Brooks, including this new, maybe we can take camera 4 so we can show off this new desktop unit that you've got there. You've got, what were you saying? You said, like, when it comes to horses, you've got, like, I was going to do an obscure chuck wagon racing reference, but you've got, like, Kelly Sutherland's barn right now under the...
That's an obscure chuck wagon reference.
unless you love racing chucks, and then you know exactly what we're talking about. But this new iMac, you're taking it for a spin.
This thing is a thoroughbred Mustang, open wide in an open field. That's what it is. This thing is I am barely touching the performance specs of this thing.
Is that right?
Point. Oh yeah.
So what you're telling me is we need to add. We'll let the team at Westworld know this. We need to throw more at you. We need to throw. we need to.
That's what I need. More on my plate.
Sal, we need to, first of all, let me pump Westworld's tires, and then we'll pump yours, because you've been doing, I wish people could see what's been going on behind the scenes today. You've been problem solving and doing an amazing job at it. But we trust Westworld with keeping us up to date with the highest end gear, because we know we can't have interruptions in this show, and they vow to do the same for you, whether it's your home setup or your business setup. Daryl and his team at Westworld here in Edmonton, just off Mayfield Road, have been in business, family business, for more than 40 years, and they're very proud of the work that they do. It's the conversations that unfold. I can't explain, and you've had to do a little troll hunting today on the comment line, and you've been doing an amazing job keeping an eye on that. But for the most part, amazingly productive conversations. Two Beaver is watching, and Two Beaver says, talking about trauma, that's what residential schools did to Indigenous people. It is also intergenerational. Absolutely true. And if you talk to Indigenous elders or cultural experts, commentators, Adam North Pagan was with us on the show. They'll talk about oftentimes the premise or the theory of 7 generations of healing, to say if we're truly going to heal from something like the trauma perpetrated by and incurred as a result of residential schools, it's going to take 7 generations for that to work its way out. And that's probably putting it crassly, to work its way out. There's a lot of work, and this is not an insignificant task. But that's absolutely the truth. I even think, have you, I don't know if I haven't spoken with you about this, but on Amazon Prime, there's that new, I think it's called Tough Guy. It's the new Bob Probert documentary. I watched it the other night, and it was, and don't get me wrong, I'm actually a huge fan of fighting in hockey. I know not everybody has an appetite for that. Some people get pissed off when I say that, but I love fighting in hockey. I think it's an important part of hockey. But when you look back on the sort of the golden era of fighting in hockey, then probably the 1970s with the Philadelphia Flyers leading into the 80s and all the heavyweights, and you think of if you pick your favorite hockey team and there's a heavyweight associated with them, I think of Vancouver Canucks, Donald Brashear. I think of the Edmonton Oilers, and take your pick, whether it's George Laraque or Marty McSorley or somebody else. In the Calgary Flames, I think of Sandy McCarthy, and every team's got their heavyweight, their enforcer. Bob Probert was that. It was the league heavyweight for years and years, but we're coming to an understanding as we see tragic lives lost, deaths by suicide, with Ripon in Vancouver and Belak and Bugard, and we're having more conversations about head injuries and concussions and brain injuries and the language we use and the stigma that has come or evaporated as a result. These are really, there's an evolution happening in society with regards to how we talk about trauma, whether it's physical trauma like brain injuries, whether it's emotional trauma, physical trauma like workplace injuries and accidents. But if you take a look at, I was watching this documentary, the 1980s or the 1990s till now, it's even remarkable how attitudes, I think, have changed. And a big part of this comes back to the conversation around stigma.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is more knowledge is more power,
Yeah.
and we're sort of in the 70s. Let's use the hockey example. In the 70s and 80s, in the tough guy enforcer era of hockey, that was how you won games. That's how you won championships, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen the game, I think, rightfully kind of evolve into a faster, more of a passing based game, more of that speed and that finesse. But I think the other thing is, it takes courage to change a norm that you're used to. You know what I mean? Everybody can agree that head trauma and head injuries are causing irreparable harm to these institutions like hockey that we care so dearly about. And it takes courage to say the way we used to do it was wrong.
Yeah.
We have to change it. And I know that, clinging to the past for past's sake is kind of destructive. And that exactly comes back into what we're talking about drug policy is you need to be willing to make an uncomfortable change, and you need to be willing to make the change in your life, whether you're a fan of hockey that's going to watch fewer fights or, supporting safe injection programs and housing programs and the things that actually give drug users the real supports they need, even though it might make you a little uncomfortable to think about.
Yeah, no kidding. And we talk about people who use drugs, and we acknowledge that, like someone said earlier, Ewan said earlier, we all use drugs. I mean, there's going to be people watching right now, or people that hear this thing, exactly, that are going, I don't use drugs, as they crush their 6th coffee of the morning or smash out their 8th dart of the morning, smoking outside. Tracy says, we need stronger labor supports as well to prevent people from self-medicating to block the pain so they can get up and go to work each day. This often begins the gateway to addiction. 100%. I wonder if you talk to, many people that are procuring their drug supply, tainted drug supply on the street, and you say, how did your journey begin? And it might be a back injury or a knee injury at work, right? It wasn't like partying and, I started smoking pot and that was the gateway to this, to this, to this, and here I am. No. For a lot of people, it was a concussion or it was a back injury. these conversations are amazing. Chris says planting seeds of kindness is so important. You may never see them bloom yourself, but it doesn't mean they aren't effective. And then how about this? Listener here says, you got to love a conversation that can take a sharp left from drug addiction and drug use to ice cream and horses. Yeah, 100%. It's how we roll. And April is watching saying, meantime, the horse population on here, or those involved with horses, is like thoroughbred Mustang. We were out of our depth.
I was pulling that out of my air. I love horses. I love being around horses. I love riding horses. I don't know anything about them.
You have a healthy respect for horses,
Absolutely.
Do you? Yeah, that's good. Hey, speaking of, no, I have no transition here, but this has been an amazing broadcast, and time really flew. I thought we could have spent another half hour talking to Banff's Mayor Karen Sorensen. We could have talked for another hour with Arlene Dickinson. We were grateful that she made time for us, and then we went way into overtime with Guy Felicella. And I guess there's really no such thing as overtime if we don't have an end time stamped on the interview. But I feel like that's a guy that we could have explored any number of angles with him and picked his brain for an hour and learned so much. I appreciate many of you that are chiming in right now saying, Joel just says, wow, that is some real talk, right? Scott's watching. He says, that was really eye-opening. I feel the same way. We want it to be that every single morning that you join us here, or every afternoon or evening that you download this podcast. I know that many of you, as a matter of fact, the majority of you will be listening to this not live. You'll be listening to this, hours or days or even weeks from now. And we're grateful for that. We hope that it pushes you to a position of being uncomfortable. Maybe not a lot of podcasts would advertise themselves, or a lot of live streaming shows would advertise themselves as come here to get uncomfortable. But that's part of our mandate. That includes the conversations yesterday. We talked about religion. We talked about the Catholic Church. We talked about sexual abuse. That was a heavy show for me. It was a heavy show for many of you, and I know that because you wrote in and you told us about it. And you've been sharing. Some of you were very angry at comments that I made about the Catholic Church and about restitution to sexual abuse victims. I don't walk back a millimeter of it, but I appreciate your passion. Some of you perceive it to be an attack on religion, which to oversimplify, but to cut right to the chase. My religion doesn't include serial sexual assaults and molestations. It doesn't include protecting predators. That has nothing to do with religion, or it should have nothing to do with religion. It's not an attack on religion to talk about the poison in the water, the poison in the well. And if you don't talk about it, then people are going to continue to sustain these types of traumas, similar to what Guy talked to us about. I'm being careful not to draw a direct line between the two stories, but when we talk about childhood trauma, for a lot of people, that has come at the hands of adults, predators that have seen these children, these young people, as their prey. It's an uncomfortable conversation to have, but we had it yesterday, and we'll continue to have these conversations because this is what Real Talk is all about, and we're grateful that you're with us on the journey. We're also grateful that we have the support of sponsors that have joined us on this journey as this show continues to grow and launches into 2021. And Friesen Brothers is one of those partners. It's amazing to hear from so many of you. Like, we're hearing from Lacombe and Sylvan Lake this week going, all this talk about Friesen Brothers is just reiterating to us that we don't have a Friesen Brothers in our neck of the woods. So I'll tell you what, I'm advocating for you. I can't make any promises, but I'm advocating for you. And in the meantime, want to let you know that they're so excited, the team at Friesen Brothers, to open their 15th Alberta location. It's happening early in 2021. We're going to give you the exact date as soon as we can, but this store just off the Anthony Henday, right around the Rabbit Hill Road area. If it's anything like the stores that we visit in Stony Plain and Fort Saskatchewan, it's going to blow your minds, and it's going to change the grocery game in Alberta's capital city. Friesen Brothers is Alberta grown and Alberta owned, as is Local Waste Services, of course, the sponsors of Trash Talk, which again, and Sam, it's an early edition of Trash Talk. It's actually coming up tomorrow, because I wanted to give a clear idea of what Real Talk's going to look like over the next couple of days. Local Waste sponsors Trash Talk, which is your chance to get things off your chest, to rant and to rave. You can submit your rants and your raves to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Make sure you mark it as a Trash Talk submission. Now, Wednesday morning, we're going to get to that right around 10 o'clock, because Thursday is a very special broadcast. Thursday is a private broadcast, if you will, that's limited to our Patreon supporters. We are so grateful to those that contribute $5 a month, or some of you more than that, to make sure that this show can continue to grow, can continue to broaden its reach. So Thursday morning, if you want to learn more about that, by the way, just go to ryanjesperson.com and click on the Patreon link, which is right in the top right-hand corner. On Thursday morning, we're going to be providing our Patreon supporters with a Zoom link. And Sam, we're going to try something for the very first time. We're doing kind of a private Q&A. We'll call it a broadcast, but really it's a gathering. It's kind of a New Year's party for our Patreon supporters. If you want to get in on that, if you want to get that Zoom link so you can join that private party, just check out the Patreon link at ryanjesperson.com. Our website is also where you're going to find the Y Station question of the week. This is where we invite you to get real. It's Get Real, our question of the week. This is how we get a very clear sense of how you feel about issues that matter. So we're building our Real Talk panel. The pitch here is very simple. It doesn't cost you anything, but it's your chance to make sure that your voice is heard. So whether you're a liberal or a conservative, whether you voted for the NDP, the Alberta Party, or the United Conservatives federally, wherever you voted, however you feel, whether you make $15,000 a year or $1.5 million a year, whether you're a 65-year-old dude or an 18-year-old girl, whether we have not even described your reality yet, the fact of the matter is we want you to be represented in our understanding of issues that matter. So check out the question of the week at ryanjesperson.com, and we would be honored if you would contribute. Now, I checked in, Sam. I took a look at where we're at this week. Our question of the week this week, and we're going to be getting to this early in the new year because we wanted to let this simmer for a bit so we could get really meaningful responses. But basically, the question is, what sort of an impact will 2020 have on you? And so it gives people an opportunity to talk about, we say at the end of 2020, a year that we'll never forget, tell us about the status of these aspects in your life. And the responses, we've got several hundred of them already. We're hoping to have 1,000 responses to this one. Once we can get into that 1,000, 1,500 number every week, I mean, we're talking very meaningful polling here, several hundred already. And we've asked people to assess these aspects of your life. So, for example, are you much worse off than before? Are you a little worse off? Are you a little better off? Or are you much better off? And we're receiving some really interesting responses. The question is still open and will remain open until next Monday's show. So you still have time to check in at ryanjesperson.com. Just click on question of the week right at the top. So here's some interesting sneak peek numbers. For example, out of several hundred responses so far, 11% of respondents say that their career is much worse off. 11%. 41% say their careers are about the same. The same number as much worse off or much better off. 11% of respondents to this point have said their careers are much better off. Now, here are some of the more interesting numbers. When it comes to finances, 25% of our respondents, a quarter of them, said their finances are a little bit better off, which was something I wasn't sure I expected. Maybe that means people haven't been traveling as much. People haven't been spending as much going out to bars and restaurants. Maybe that's it. Maybe the entertainment budgets have been lower. Are you surprised to hear that number?
I'm not surprised. I think that 2020 has really highlighted a bit of a divide in that there's some people that were just kind of living on the edge and doing everything they could to hold on this year, and some people use it as an opportunity to save, quite frankly. Like, they were comfortable and they had good jobs and they had stuff that was kind of keeping them going. And they said, I'm okay with just taking what I need to live right now and putting everything else in the bank.
People
and
have kind of
riding it out,
rejigged it a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. Now, here's the one that we're really paying attention to, and again, when we talk about our Get Real question of the week, dictating or directing some of our editorial directions on the show, here's one. We're going to be talking to mental health counselors. We want to provide resources. Dr. Peter Silverstone's going to join us again, the psychiatrist that many of you fell in love with during his last appearance on the show. When it comes to your mental health, out of the several hundred respondents we have so far, tell us about the status, we asked, of your mental health. 16% of respondents said it's much worse off than January of 2020. 46% said it's a little worse off than January of 2020, which means that 62% of respondents, 62% said that their mental health is either a little or much worse off than January of 2020. So we're going to do our part as your friends. We're going to do our part as community contributors here to provide the resources as best we can to get us focused collectively and individually heading into 2021. So that'll be in shows to come. Tomorrow's show is going to be a good one. We're very much looking forward to it. One of the interviews we've confirmed, I haven't even told you yet, Johnny Infamous. He DJ'd an empty barn at the Stanley Cup Finals. He's back at it with the World Juniors. He's going to talk to us about being a hype man with nobody in the rink. And then that special broadcast on Thursday. We'll talk to you tomorrow at 8:30 Mountain Time. Thanks for watching Real Talk.